In the news tonight, His Majesty the Supreme Commander discusses regional developments with the Commander of the U.S. Central Command and attends a tactical military drill. Syrians vote in a parliamentary election boycotted by the opposition as the United Nations begins a new round of Syria peace talks. And amid a deepening political crisis in Iraq, the army backed by US-led airstrikes retake the western town of Heat from Daesh. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army, met Commander of the U.S. Central Command, General Joseph Votel. The meeting held at the General Command of the Armed Forces and attended by the King's military advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Mishal al-Zibn, and His Royal Highness Prince Faisal dealt with the latest regional and international developments. King Abdullah, accompanied by General Votel and Army Chief and Prince Faisal, attended a tactical military drill carried out by the 30th Hussein bin Ali Special Mission Brigade. The drill included combat in built-up areas with air backing by helicopters and fighter jets, as well as paratroopers landing and live fire from weapons of various calibers, including individual and support arms. During the exercise, also watched by military officers and a group of Ministry of Education students, and troops displayed a high level of precision during the various stages of the exercise. The Supreme Commander also visited the Rapid Response Force, Desert Eagle, to check on trainings, operational and technical issues, and voiced his admiration on their combat readiness. Deputizing for His Majesty the King, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour will take part in the 13th session of the Islamic Summit that starts in the Turkish city of Istanbul tomorrow. Mansour left for Turkey to join leaders of Islamic countries at the summit, which is held by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Acting Senate President Maruf al-Bakhit said Jordan is one of the world's biggest hosts of refugees in terms of population. He told a Russian parliamentary delegation the kingdom has economically suffered most as a result of the influx of refugees due to its limited resources and poor services and infrastructure. He said the kingdom had survived the tough and tragic conditions in the region and forged ahead with wide-ranging political reforms. Lower House Speaker Atif Taraune also told the Russian lawmakers that failure to find a just solution to the Palestinian issue would push Arabs and Muslim youth into extremism and terrorism. He also said linking Islam with terrorism is unrealistic and incorrect, as terrorism is everywhere and has no religion, ethnicity, or nationality. Syrians voted in a parliamentary election in government-held areas of the country in what they called a show of support for President Bashar al-Assad. But the opposition said the election is meaningless, while Britain and France dismissed it as a sham. It comes as the United Nations began a new round of Syria peace talks in Geneva. More in this report.
Syrians cast ballots for parliament, but diplomacy is struggling to make progress. Voters were to elect 250 MPs to parliament, which has no real power in Syria's presidential system. While Syrians voted in government-held areas of the country, opponents and Western powers denounced the poll as illegitimate. But Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Syria's parliamentary elections aim to avoid a legal vacuum before early elections are held under a new constitution. The election is going ahead independently of a UN-led peace process aimed at ending the 5-year-long war. Recently returned residents of Palmyra voted in the parliamentary elections after the Russian-backed Syrian forces had retaken the destroyed ancient city from Daesh militants. Casting his ballot in Damascus with his wife at his side, President Bashar al-Assad said terrorism had been able to destroy much of Syria's infrastructure, but not Syria's social structure, the national identity. He said it was the first time a president had taken part in parliamentary polls. It comes amid an upsurge in fighting that darkened the already struggling diplomacy. UN Syria envoy Staffan de Mistura began a new round of Syria talks in Geneva by meeting members of the main opposition High Negotiations Committee. A Syrian government delegation is expected to arrive on Friday. The previous round ended on March 24th, with de Mistura promising to hone in on the divisive question of Syria's political transition when the warring parties return to Geneva. Hala Dababne for the news at 10.
Syrian civilians continue to cross into Jordan, with hundreds entering the border daily. The Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army statement said that over the last 24 hours, border guards dealt with 301 people fleeing the civil war in Syria and seeking refuge in the kingdom. It said the refugees who were from various age groups were provided with the necessary aid and transported them to shelters and refugee camps. The statement said Royal Medical Services personnel attended to the ill refugees. Iraq's political crisis is deepened as MPs scuffled over an anti-corruption plan. Parliamentary Speaker Salim al-Jbouri may request the dissolution of the assembly, which saw the fight during a chaotic parliamentary session over the plan to overhaul the government that aims to tackle corruption. The possibility of holding new elections in Iraq was raised after state television reported that al-Jbouri was considering the future of the current assembly. Dozens of MPs began at sit-in inside the parliament building to demand that Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi sticks to his plan to introduce a cabinet of independent technocrats. As the political deadlock persists, Iraqi forces backed by US-led coalition airstrikes reached the center of the western town of Heat. The army is dislodging Daesh militants and evacuated thousands of civilians this week. Here's more.
This is what Iraqi forces are calling the final battles to retake the town of Hit from Islamic State control. Military sources say more than 80% of the town has been liberated. Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad al-Tamimi is optimistic as they take down IS fighters amid reports they have established a defensive perimeter around Hit.
Our forces are now taking position in front of Hit Hospital. We have liberated most parts of Hit, and only a few sections are remaining to fully liberate Hit, God willing.
Authorities say they have helped more than 10,000 civilians clear the area. Jihadists have regularly used civilians as human shields. It's a tactic aimed at slowing the advance of Iraqi forces and complicating airstrikes essential to the ground advance. But the coalition air campaign goes on, hoping the recapture of Hit will push Islamic State further west towards the Syrian border.
Local ceasefire monitors arrived at 3 Yemeni provinces to consolidate a shaky truce. The monitors were deployed ahead of UN-sponsored peace talks scheduled to start in Kuwait next week. Local officials said teams of 12 monitors arrived in Ma'rib province, east of the capital Sana'a, in southwestern Taz province, and in Hajjaj province in the south. They will try to stop truce violation and allow humanitarian aid to pass through. The monitors consist of officers and tribal figures from among the Houthi militia and followers of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, along with President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi's government. They would also try to resolve problem and record complaints of violation and send them to a higher committee working under United Nations supervision. The deployment comes amid fresh reports of violation that began at midnight on Sunday. Macedonian police fired tear gas to disperse around 50 migrant protesters stranded in Greece. The refugees tried to pull down part of the razor wire fence separating Greece and Macedonia. Scuffles briefly broke out and Greek riot police later interfered to break up the crowd, which had approached the border fence and chanted, "Open the border." Tensions have boiled over in the recent days at the makeshift migrant camp near the town of Idomeni, where more than 10,000 migrants and refugees have been stranded since February. Hundreds of migrants were wounded in Sunday clashes with Macedonian police, who fired tear gas and rubber bullets after a group tried to storm the border. The Balkan route was the preferred gateway into Western and Northern Europe last year for around 1 million migrants from the Middle East and beyond. The migrants have refused to leave the site and go to official shelters, hoping to find a way to eventually cross the border and continue their journey to the rest of Europe. Traffic backed up and schools were shut in the Saudi capital Riyadh after the desert city was struck by a rare severe storm that triggered flooding. The storm, which struck during yesterday evening's rush hour, had subsided by daybreak today, but some roads were still inundated. Traffic backed up for kilometers along at least one major thoroughfares, and many vehicles broke down as the deluge flooded city streets. Stage 4 of the grueling Marathon des Sables in Morocco began today as participants attempted to cross 84.3 kilometers of rugged desert terrain in the heat. A number of participants voiced their relief at reaching the summit of a small mountain in the early part of the stage. 56-year-old British participant Margaret Morgan said she felt she was getting too old for such a physical challenge. The elite runners, who started separately, began the race a little later, with the fastest runners expected to finish the stage late into the evening. Eight-time champion Rafael Nadal served twice and still beat Aljaz Bedin of Britain 6-3, 6-3 in the second round of the Monte Carlo Masters. Nadal was broken for a second time when serving for the match at 5-3, but the Spaniard broke straight back to seal victory. The fifth-seeded Nadal, who won the last of his title in 2012, next faces 12th-seeded Dominic Thiem of Austria. Number 4, Stan Wawrinka, also advanced past Philipp Kohlschreiber 7-6, 7-5 into the third round. And finally, relatively cold in many areas and partly cloudy for the rest of tonight, with a chance of occasional showers that might be heavy and accompanied by thunder and lightning at times. Winds will be northwesterly moderate. The chance for rain will diminish later tonight, with fog expected over the highlands. Tomorrow temperatures will rise slightly, but will be below average at this time of the year, with cloudiness and possible drizzles forecast during the day. Clouds will lift off gradually in the evening hours tomorrow, and conditions will stabilize later at night. In the Gulf of Aqaba, partly cloudy with possible light showers, northerly moderate winds and calm seas, turning a bit choppy tomorrow. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end the news, here's a recap of our top stories. His Majesty, the Supreme Commander, discusses regional development with the Commander of the U.S. Central Command and attends a tactical military drill. Syrians vote in a parliamentary election boycotted by the opposition as the United Nations begins a new round of Syria peace talks. And amid a deepening political crisis in Iraq, the army backed by US-led airstrikes retake the western town of Heat from Daesh. And with this we come to an end. I'm Farah Ajlouni. Thank you for watching and have a good night.